Welcome back to the Standard Podcast, and I'm Mark Blunden. If you're new here, please do make sure to give us a follow and a rating. Up first, we're with the London Standard's transport editor, Ross Lydall. We'll discuss research by the London Cycling Campaign, which has found more than half of the capital's official cycleways include sections that are unsafe for women to use at night. Ross reports that the LCC's Women's Network found 52 of the 89 cycleways had at least one section that was described as socially unsafe after dark, and that 7 cycleways were considered unsafe along their entire route. In Part 2, we'll hear from the charity's Senior Campaigns Officer Clare Rogers about the data gathering process and some of the shocking experiences of women cycling in London after dark. But first, we're joined by Ross Lydall. Which routes were called out for being particularly bad by LCC?
They listed 7 cycleways that they said were entirely unsafe along the full route. And this includes the Grand Union Canal cycleway, which sort of goes from around the sort of Kensal Rise, Queen's Park area out towards Hillingdon. But in particular, the section just west of Scrubs Lane in Harlesden becomes a TfL cycleway. And they say this is particularly threatening because it's entirely on the towpath. It sounds lovely in the summer, but is really quite threatening in the evening, at night, over winter. Primarily because there's no obvious escape route. These are areas that are known for sort of antisocial behaviour. And of course, if you get confronted on a towpath, you really don't have anywhere to go. They also highlighted cycleway 10 as it winds its way around Millwall Football Stadium. Again, that's on a sort of isolated path alongside a railway line. And the other one that they mentioned was the Greenway, which is well known to me because that connects the Olympic Park with Canning Town. It's the way I tend to come to City Hall. It's a great cycleway during the day, but again, it's isolated. And when you're on it, you're pretty exposed. There's not a lot of people around you. There's no passing traffic, which in a sense is a good thing because you're not at risk from vehicles. However, you are at risk from muggers. So the LCC group here is essentially saying to TfL is that TfL must take seriously this concern, and when it's funding new cycle routes, it must think, are these routes going to be safe at night for women to use? If they're not, then these routes and their money, their investment will not help to get more women on bikes.
Are there any calls for particular measures for improving safety? And there's this interesting term as well, social safety.
Social safety is a sort of concept of being around other people or other sets of eyes or CCTV, essentially being in a sort of public place so that you feel secure because others are around, that you're not in a deserted area where there's essentially nobody to shout out to for help should you need it. Just that sort of sense that you're not isolated, alone, and there's somebody up ahead who looks threatening. So they want better lighting. They want cycle routes to go through places where, say, people might live, or there might be shops nearby, just so there's a general buzz of community. One other concern is that many cycle routes go through parks, which can be lovely during the day, but again, really quite threatening at night, whether it's even Hyde Park or going through Kensington Gardens and so on. And these places can be pretty spooky. So that's really part of the request, just like for councils to think very carefully where they're routing cycle routes. They're saying that councils too often have defaulted to using parks as an excuse not to put segregated cycle lanes on roads, and therefore cyclists are being sort of shunted off into nice areas during the day, but which are potentially threatening at night.
Has the Mayor's Office or TfL commented, and are they committing to any additional improvements for safety for female cyclists?
What's interesting in terms of the TfL response is that it says the main reason for women and girls not cycling is the concern about road danger, namely that they'll be unsafe on the roads, and they mean by that unsafe as in being hit by cars or lorries. They're saying that the risk from muggers, from abuse from other people, is less of a deterrent than the actual risk to their physical safety when riding a bike, which is quite interesting. And it's certainly true that studies in the past have found that more generally for cyclists. TfL says that it already does include considerations about social safety in its planning for new routes, and it always tries to make sure these routes are open 24/7 and are well lit. And one example there would be the Park Lane cycleway, where there's been an ongoing issue about, well, isn't it just enough to have the cycle lane inside Hyde Park, which goes roughly from Hyde Park Corner up to Marble Arch? And TfL says, well, no, we need the one on Park Lane as well, because you can't cycle in the park at night because it's closed, or because it obviously becomes a bit scary for some people to use after dark. So what TfL are saying is that, yes, they're aware of these concerns. They welcome the research. They say it's a good contribution to the wider debate, but it is trying to build more cycle lanes. And it talked, for example, about Cycle 49 in Ealing, where it says it's just installed lighting there.
Let's go to a quick break. Coming up in part 2, personal stories and data behind this major cycle safety report. Welcome back. A women's Freedom After Dark protest ride, that's named after the report's title, is being held on Thursday evening this week. The ride will set off from Marble Arch with about 200 riders reclaiming the capital's scariest nighttime cycleways. Now we're joined by the London Cycling Campaign's Senior Campaigns Officer, Clare Rogers. What was the reason behind this study? And this obviously follows up from your previous research last year.
Yes, that's right. So last year we surveyed over 1,000 women in London, and that was called What Stops Women Cycling in London. And we found from that survey that 1 in 3 women just simply stop cycling in winter due to a lack of safe routes. And we also found that 55% were saying we face this impossible choice regularly between facing stranger danger, going through a dark place, an isolated place like a park, or traffic danger on a busy road without protected cycle lanes. So that really alerted us to one of the things that is a barrier for women cycling in London. We decided to investigate it further.
What was your research data collection process?
This was really London Cycling Campaign women volunteers at their finest. We had over 20 volunteers riding TfL's official cycle network after dark, the whole thing, assessing routes. We had a set of quality criteria, what makes a route socially unsafe after dark. And that was done over, I think, 3 or 4 months. And then it was all compiled onto a map. And then we crunched the map data and we got our results, which were pretty shocking.
What is the current picture for those risks and dangers that female cyclists face?
As our survey respondents said, that there is this sense of risk because you've got this impossible choice between 2 different types of danger. If you like it, it's improved. Transport for London has done a lot in growing the cycle network across London. We are seeing much more of protected space for cycling on roads and low traffic neighbourhoods that are safe places for any age to cycle through. Well, the problem is that it's not uniformly safe. So we're finding that it's a political will problem, it's a courage problem by local councils. So they've got the choice of routing a cycleway along a road where they know they're going to have to take space from cars and they're going to get some backlash and it's a bit politically scary. So why not just route it through the park? Why not just route it alongside the canal? Job done. Motorists won't get upset. And that's what they've been doing because TfL allow them to route their cycleways. They will approve that, they will fund that. And that is the problem. That's not where the cycleways need to go because it's not enabling more people to cycle. It's especially off-putting for women.
What are some of the specific examples you've heard from your LCC members?
There are so many. A really shocking thing is that 7 of the London cycleways, 7 entire routes end to end, are socially unsafe after dark, according to our research. And one of these is the Grand Union Canal cycleway. So 23 kilometres of that is official TfL cycleway. It goes through 5 boroughs. And the whole thing is a horror show after dark. Most men would not want to be cycling there after dark. It's not just women. There's no escape routes. It's poorly lit. There's ambush points. We know there's been crimes committed there, serious crimes. It's not a place you'd want to find yourself cycling. And yet because it's an official TfL cycleway, the 5 boroughs it goes through haven't bothered to provide safe alternatives on their roads because it looks like they have a cycleway. This is the problem that we're facing. And if you talk to women in West London, they will say, I will not touch that cycleway after dark. It's a barrier to cycling for me.
Did you hear any particular stories from the women that you spoke to from their own experiences that you could share?
Yes, really, really horrifying stories, actually. More than one woman had said to us, I encountered men blocking the path on cycleway 10 in Lewisham, where it goes past Millwall Stadium, trying to push me off my bike. That's people trying to steal bikes and mug people. And 2 women that separately have told us exactly the same story and how they managed to get away and have never gone back to that route. And they anecdotally say from people who cycle locally just don't go that way. Don't go on that cycleway. It's alongside a railway line. It's very isolated, lots of ambush points. So yeah, really, really distressing stories like that. And then those women, again, they're left with a choice of, I have to go on Ilderton Road, other main roads in the area. And one woman who avoided cycleway 10 because of the stories was on Ilderton Road, and two cars literally crashed into each other right next to her. Inches from her bike. So she's like, what am I supposed to do? And she now takes a much, much longer detour. 90% of women who responded to our report, and remember this is over 1,000 women who responded, 90% said that at some point they'd had verbal abuse or harassment from drivers while cycling in London. And I think it was around 70% said it happened to them at least once a month. So it's a huge problem. And interestingly, a lot of it occurs when women are cycling in primary position. When you take the middle of the lane, which is something you're taught to do in cycle training, when you're going through a pinch point, you take the lane in order to stop cars overtaking you. And male drivers have really reacted badly to women doing this and called women all sorts of terms of abuse. It's rife. It's really unacceptable.
And that's The Standard. For the latest news, head over to standard.co.uk. This podcast is back tomorrow at 4 p.m.